Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. War in Iran and rising Middle East tensions are forcing Europe to rethink its strategy, with French President Emmanuel Macron visiting the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle in Cyprus on Monday. Now, furthermore, German Foreign Minister Jan Wadepoel has stated that, quote, if there was a necessity and our Cyprus friends will let us know that there is one, Germany will be ready to be engaged there, end quote. Now, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is also warning the bloc can no longer rely solely on the rules-based order. But to analyze it all, we're joined by Gabor Scheiring, Assistant Professor of Comparative Politics at Georgetown University in Qatar. Good to have you with us here on TVP World. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Beginning with the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, it is the only nuclear-powered, actually the only aircraft carrier that the French possess. It's quite a force. That being deployed near Cyprus, Macron there on the deck saying if Cyprus is attacked, Europe is attacked together. What do we make of that statement, the position of the carrier, and what's next for that kind of deployment?
The very visible show of unity, solidarity in the context of Cyprus is a really important development in terms of common European security. That's something that is being developed. There are existing legal precedents for that, but actual defense carried out through European military solidarity is something newly emerging in Europe, where military defense has been very much based on American presence. So all this signaling of solidarity and protection towards Cyprus against attacks from Lebanon or Iran, from Hezbollah forces in Lebanon or from Iran, is, I think, a critically important development in terms of European security initiatives.
Okay. Now, President Macron has also said, and he was also basically hinting at the idea of protecting assets and also shipments of oil in the Strait of Hormuz once this initial hot phase dies down. I mean, how realistic is that kind of mission for the French to go there? And who will join them on the European side? Will they do this alone?
I mean, French troops are already present. They have agreements in the UAE. They have forces present involved in the defense of other Gulf countries such as Qatar. Italy is present in the region with important forces. Such is the case also with the United Kingdom being present in Qatar and other countries in the region. Through its air force. So this is another important aspect of EU Middle East relations. These are partner countries in the Gulf region being protected for the sake of civilian life in the region, but also for the sake of Europe's economic security and energy security. We know, of course, that Europe is highly vulnerable when it comes to gas and oil, and a large part of that comes from the Gulf region. And making sure that those facilities, civilian and energy infrastructures, are protected is vital for the EU. So again, I see this as an important development, though it's mostly taking place bilaterally. So there's no kind of coordinated EU response to be present in the Gulf, but also if you listen to Gulf country leaders themselves, they also kind of appreciate and value this presence of European forces for the sake of protection, right? So it's very important to make a clear distinction between offensive arrangements and presence of troops for offensive operations in Iran versus defending civilian and economic oil and energy infrastructure in the Gulf countries.
Yeah, it's also notable, as you mentioned there, I mean, this is the French saying one thing. There's some coordination, as you alluded to, but also significant. China very much being very careful on what they're saying as well, and Russians also saying a different thing. But I want to get into energy for a moment, because that's also key. That's one of the reasons I think Macron said he wants to protect that line of energy flowing back at some point in time. let's talk about the G7. The G7 met on Monday to talk about the release of strategic oil reserves. Ultimately, there was no release announced. Nevertheless, that had impact on the markets. Just tell us in terms of where this is going. Will this be released? And if it is released, I mean, the timeline of this, the capacity, where do we stand with that kind of option?
Yeah, so actual physical action is one thing, and then the communication around it to manage expectations is another thing. So that in itself can be read as an involvement in markets to kind of steer prices. By the way, we saw, I think, something similar in the United States happening with Donald Trump's announcements about the war ending soon. I think that was also in response to rising oil prices, which managed to kind of turn back the direction of prices. So these even just at the level of communication can at least temporarily calm the markets. We also know that it's the end of the winter in Europe, so there's no kind of direct threat to European markets. But at the global level, if this crisis continues to escalate, and despite Donald Trump's recent remarks, very contradictory remarks, there's no very clear end in sight in the very near term. So if this continues to escalate, the instability of Gulf energy systems could reverberate throughout the whole global economy, not just through energy, but other critical materials are impacted through disruptions of energy supply from the Gulf region.
Mm-hmm. And Gabor, if I may, I want to also quote you, actually. You were writing on this not so long ago in terms of also what the head of the commissioners have underlined, that you said we can no longer rely just simply on the rules-based order, which is an interesting comment in of itself. Now, practically, what does that mean? And based on what you've written, also calling it, I believe, the bankruptcy of Atlanticism, talking about the dependency on the United States. So how do we, let's say, square that one, and where does that lead Europe?
I think Europe is in a multiply dangerous and vulnerable position. There's a clear leadership crisis. Part of European leaders in Berlin, London especially, are sticking to an old kind of Atlanticist framework that is being actively dismantled from Washington itself. So Donald Trump is very clear that he has no respect at all for international law. For European leaders, international law seems to be important on multiple occasions when it comes to Ukraine or when it comes to Greenland. They're very well prepared to kind of come out in defense of international law. However, in other cases, such as when there is a very clear violation of international law from the side of the United States or Israel, European leaders are much more confused what to say. There are some, like Spain or Norway, that follow a more principled leadership, but at the European level, there is clear confusion. And this is not just impacting Europe, it's impacting the whole global order. So with the United States under leadership of Donald Trump is out, it's not functioning as an anchor of any rules-based international system. So there's an increasing demand from other countries around the world to see Europe acting as a partner with other countries, following a principled, values-based, realist approach. But that approach is just not emerging. So while, as previously we discussed, it's important that Europe is protecting Cyprus, is contributing to the defense of the Gulf countries, but when it comes to protecting any rules-based international system, I think Europe is not living up to expectations from outside, but also when we read European identity, European values, these are, I have to say, cynically applied when it comes to power and strategic interests of key Western allies of the EU.
But an interesting narrative. At the same time, we don't know where it's going to be going. At the same time, Europe is stuck in a challenging role, isn't it? Because it must also protect its own interests. It usually has relied on the United States in many ways for that. I mean, do you see this as a broader shift now, let's say a pressing shift, because what we've seen in Iran? Will Europe change as a result of all this?
Well, there's been talk of change for some time now, right, in terms of strategic autonomy, but it's just very hard to see the practical implications of that. And also, we keep on seeing this kind of cynical communication coming up again and again, especially from German leaders. So that again goes against a principled European autonomous leadership, and it just reinforces the impression that Europe is a junior partner of the United States that is just disregarding international law. So while there is talk, I think the action on the ground is just much slower. There's an increased defense spending, but it's just not enough to spend more money. A large part of that money we know is flowing back to the United States. When it comes to coordinating industrial policy, it's much harder, not just in military, but also when you look at tech. There is now talk about more of technology autonomy, but actually pulling it off requires years and requires institutions that Europe has not invested in. There's very little capacity at the European level for the kind of coordinated industrial policy that Europe would require to increase its autonomy. Military autonomy and economic autonomy really go
just really quick, I'm sorry to interrupt you, just give me 20 seconds on my thought here. So you mentioned industrial policy, you mentioned also upgrading. A lot of that funding and resources are being held up, namely by Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Do you think that's one of the main key issues, just before we close?
That's a huge issue, yes. I mean, Europe should come up with a way to handle these kinds of leaders. They will probably, even if Viktor Orban loses his ability to govern in April, and Europe needs a governance structure that cannot be disrupted by illiberal figures like Viktor Orban.
All right, so much to discuss. I'm happy to do so again next time. But look, thanks for all those insights today. That was our guest here today, Gabor Scheiring from the Georgetown University in Qatar. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks. But stay right here, as always, on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.